where we need to be focusing. But in our focusing, we need to explain what sustainability really is. And it's not just about that. Protecting the potential of natural resources, it's important, but sustainability for the country is far more than that. It's also about maintaining and enhancing productivity, decreasing risk to production. That's why we use irrigation and herbicides, insecticides, fertilizers. We must be economically viable. This is a message I take out to society again and again, making the point that if we aren't economically viable as a sector, then why would anybody come into it? And by the way, then New Zealand would have a problem. But we also must be socially acceptable, and that means showing how we are protecting the potential of our natural resources, as well as producing 64% of the export merchandise economy. It means capitalising on Economics 101, which tells us that a sustainable competitive advantage is achieved when nobody else can mimic what you're doing. And in New Zealand's case, I believe that that is sustainability for our primary sector. Protecting the resources, but producing the food. Nobody else, I've just lost the mic, can do it in quite the same way that other countries can. But what it's going to take, and again, Economics 101, is access to excellent scientific research, skilled creative product development teams, strong sales teams, and a superb reputation. And New Zealand has had all this in the past, and we need probably to make sure that we have it in the future before we get eroded in terms of our capability. That's right throughout our sector. We need scientists and engineers. This must be my most favourite graph in the whole wide world. It was created by Michael Porter and Chuck Stern for the World Economic Forum in 2001. And it shows that the ability to create wealth from innovation, up here, depends upon the scientists and engineers in the workforce. There are 127 countries on that graph. Chuck Stern and Michael Porter were looking for the reason for why some countries develop economically more rapidly than others. And they looked at entrepreneurs, love it. R squared of 0.24 for entrepreneurs, looks like a Dalmatian dog, spots everywhere, but they can draw a line. The line means nothing, but they can still draw a line for entrepreneurs. It's actually to do with scientists and engineers. And New Zealand's about there. Must be that one. Just slightly above the line. But gosh, wouldn't we rather be up there somewhere? Actually pushing our economy forwards? We're not. We do remarkably well, but we're not, because of the amount of money we spend on R&D. And we are 23rd in the world in terms of R&D as a percentage of GDP. So gross domestic product, how much are we putting into research and development? About 1.2% of our gross domestic product. Is that an issue? Stay with me. Yes, it is an issue because of competitiveness. And it's worse if we start looking at the actual amount of money we spend per capita in New Zealand, because we note that in the United States at number 1, and this is all pay parity indexed for purchasing power, not just exchange rate, at $1,146 of GDP per capita. Not so good. Really not so good. Why do people in research go to Australia? Pretty much easier to get money. Not so good. Some of us choose to stay or come back to New Zealand because we went there and it was sand, so we came home again. Should I have stayed in Britain? Nah. New Zealand is a much better, clean, green, beautiful environment. But global competitiveness is directly linked to R&D expenditure. So this is a message for you, for our various politicians, in terms of how you are going to assist achieve that sustainable competitive advantage through sustainable production systems. We actually do need more research dollars. We haven't been keeping up. There's the R&D investment for Denmark, which was third on the list there. New Zealand's been pretty static for the last 20, 30 years. Not good. And that is having a major effect on our productivity. We heard yesterday at a science review meeting that we're missing about $30 billion in productivity in comparison with Australia. That every hour worked in Australia is worth 30% more than every hour worked in New Zealand. How are we going to fix that? They're extraordinary figures. How are we going to fix that? By using our money wisely, sensibly, and thinking about the research system in which we work. Drivers of productivity, Ministry of Labour information, is innovation. And innovation is that believed to be sheeted home to government research, where you do things that are for public good. Enterprise, the business research side of things, where you do things with that innovative result that might result in some sort of technological development or a new service or product that will make your lives easier. Then there's the skills and education stuff. Donovan and Massey Agriculture, we're all desperately trying to rank up the education system in our area. There's investment, particularly in infrastructure, and we know that New Zealand has had a poor track record in that, which may be why we've got this 30% difference in productivity with Australia. And then our beautiful, gorgeous natural resources, and New Zealand does have a huge potential. Well, we've been exploiting that potential, but we have a huge resource. That is our added advantage, that is our comparative advantage that we're trying to make competitive. You remember when the Knowledge Wave conferences were all about, you know, IT and bioinformatics, gene technologies, and the creative and performing arts, my personal favourite. And what happens? Nothing. If you actually look at what those areas have actually given without our sector, it's absolutely nothing, which is why, of course, Fast Forward was invented, and now we've got the Primary Growth Partnership. Business investment in research is very important. Remember I said that's where productivity, once you've got the creative innovation, the productivity comes from translating that into the community that is using the research. But when we look at the amount that's given in New Zealand by businesses, so we need to go and talk to PGG, Rice and Gallagher, Fonterra, all of that lot, it's very small. And when you look at that in comparison with OECD or Denmark or any of the countries that are doing really well, you can see that our amount is absolutely pathetic. 5.6 times in Sweden, 3.7 times in Denmark in terms of comparisons. And per capita, it's even worse. So in fact, New Zealand's investment through business is very poor and is holding us back. So how are we going to fix that? We'll come back. Public R&D for agriculture has not been keeping up with other places in the world, but you see it's the 70s that the Australians really ramped up. Our amount of percentage, the public R&D as a percentage of agricultural GDP is pretty small, given that that is where our export economy is based, given that that is where our natural resources are managed. And the challenges we face here are huge. So hold those figures in your mind, because you've done a fantastic job. Our multi-factor productivity, which takes into account the research, the stuff that you generate each hour, it also considers all the technologies that are used by you guys, has been improving at a much greater rate, particularly during the 90s, than any other sector of the economy. You should be feeling happy. There's a few smiles here. You've done a tremendous job despite the small amount of money that has actually been spent on research for your sector. And when, well, these wonderful people, Mason and Osborne, did some calculations,